In the 1960s and 70s, our grandmothers knew how to make Christmas cookies that mattered. Their work in the kitchen didn't just fill cookie tins, it created dozens of varieties so special the neighbors could smell them from the street. Cookies that have been lost to time. These 30 forgotten Christmas cookies from the 1960s and 70s might sound too complicated today, but they carried families through the holidays, brought joy to every table, and beyond. Let's rediscover forgotten Christmas cookies from the 1960s and 70s that have disappeared. Walk into Grandma Helga's Wisconsin kitchen in December 1968 and smell Pfeffernusse baking. These tiny German spice cookies were smaller than a walnut, hard as rocks when they came out of the oven and coated in powdered sugar. She'd mix flour with black pepper, white pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, cardamom, and anise. Then add molasses, honey, and butter. The dough was stiff and spicy, almost medicinal smelling. She'd roll it into marble-sized balls and bake them until they were hard. After cooling, she'd shake them in a bag of powdered sugar until they were completely white. The cookies cost about 75 cents to make 100. They tasted intensely spicy, peppery, warm, complex, with a slight sweetness from the honey. You were supposed to dunk them in coffee or tea to soften them. Stand beside Grandma Betty's Michigan kitchen table on December 20th, 1972, and watch her making cherry winks. These were chunky drop cookies loaded with chopped pecans, dates, and maraschino cherries, then rolled in crushed cornflakes before baking. She'd cream butter and sugar, add eggs and vanilla, then mix in flour, baking soda, and salt. The dough was thick and sticky, studded with red and green maraschino cherries cut into quarters, chopped dates, and pecans. She'd scoop balls of dough, roll them in crushed cornflakes, and top each one with a maraschino cherry half. They baked until golden, with the cornflakes turning crispy and toasted. The cookies cost $1.50 to make 4 dozen. They tasted sweet, fruity, crunchy, and buttery all at once, with the cornflakes adding a toasted crunch. Walk into Grandma Rose's New York apartment kitchen in December 1965 and watch her making Russian tea cakes. These were buttery, crumbly cookies made with finely ground pecans or walnuts, rolled into balls, baked until pale golden, then rolled in powdered sugar twice, once while hot, once after cooling. She'd cream butter with powdered sugar, add vanilla and flour, then fold in finely chopped pecans she'd ground in her meat grinder. The dough was rich and crumbly, barely holding together. She'd shape it into walnut-sized balls and bake them until they were just set, not browned. While still hot, she'd roll them in powdered sugar, which melted slightly into the cookies. After cooling, she'd roll them again, creating a thick white coating. They cost $1 to make 5 dozen. They tasted buttery, nutty, and melt-in-your-mouth tender, dissolving on your tongue like snowballs. Stand in Grandma Anna's Pennsylvania Dutch kitchen on December 18, 1970, and watch her making sand tarts. These were thin, crispy sugar cookies cut into shapes, brushed with egg white, then sprinkled with cinnamon sugar, and topped with a blanched almond half before baking. She'd make a simple dough with butter, sugar, eggs, flour, and vanilla, then chill it overnight. On baking day, she'd roll the dough paper thin and cut it into diamonds, circles, or stars. Each cookie got brushed with beaten egg white, sprinkled generously with cinnamon sugar, and topped with half a blanched almond pressed into the center. They baked until golden and crispy. The cookies cost 60 cents to make 100. They tasted buttery, sweet, and cinnamon-spiced, with a delicate crunch that shattered when you bit into them. The almond added a toasted, nutty flavor. Walk into Grandma Dorothy's Minnesota kitchen in December 1967 and watch her loading dough into a cookie press. Spritz cookies were buttery, delicate cookies made by pressing dough through a metal press. fitted with decorative discs. She'd cream butter with sugar until fluffy, add an egg and almond extract, then mix in flour and salt. The dough had to be the perfect consistency. Too soft, and it wouldn't hold its shape. Too stiff, and the press wouldn't work. She'd fill the press, attach a disc shaped like a Christmas tree or wreath, and press the dough directly onto ungreased cookie sheets. The cookies baked quickly, staying pale and tender. She'd decorate some with colored sugar or candied cherries before baking. They cost 50 cents to make 6 dozen. They tasted pure butter with a hint of almond, delicate and crisp. 5 cookies down, 45 more to go. Notice something? Every single one required special equipment, hours of work, and skills your grandmother learned from her mother. You buy slice-and-bake dough. She made cookies that required cookie presses and meat grinders. Keep going. Stand beside Grandma Edna's Ohio kitchen on December 15, 1974, and watch her making date nut pinwheels. She'd cook chopped dates with sugar and water until they formed a thick paste, then stir in chopped walnuts. The date filling cooled while she made sugar cookie dough. She'd roll the dough into a rectangle, spread the date nut filling evenly across it, then roll it up like a jelly roll. The log went into the refrigerator overnight to firm up. The next day, she'd slice the log into quarter-inch rounds, revealing a spiral of dough and dark filling. They baked until golden. The cookies cost $1 to make 4 dozen. They tasted sweet and fruity from the dates, crunchy from the walnuts, buttery from the dough. Walk into Grandma Margaret's California kitchen in December 1969 and watch her making thumbprint cookies. She'd make a simple butter cookie dough with flour, sugar, butter, egg yolks, and vanilla. After shaping the dough into balls, she'd roll each ball in beaten egg white, then roll it in finely chopped pecans or walnuts until completely coated. She'd place them on a baking sheet and press her thumb into the center of each cookie, creating a deep well. They baked until golden. Then she'd fill each thumbprint with a spoonful of jam, usually raspberry, strawberry, or apricot. The cookies cost 75 cents to make 3 dozen. They tasted buttery and nutty, with the sweet tart jam providing a burst of fruit flavor. Stand in Grandma Astrid's North Dakota kitchen on December 12, 1971, and watch her making Berliner Kranzer. These Norwegian cookies were shaped into wreaths by rolling dough into ropes, forming them into circles, and dipping one end in egg white, then coarse sugar before overlapping the ends. She'd cream butter with sugar, add hard-boiled egg yolks mashed through a sieve, then mix in flour and vanilla. The dough was rich and slightly crumbly. She'd roll pieces into pencil-thin ropes, form them into wreaths, dip the ends in egg white and pearl sugar, then bake until pale golden. The cookies cost 50 cents to make 5 dozen. They tasted buttery and delicate, with a tender crumb that melted in your mouth. The pearl sugar added sparkle and a slight crunch. Walk into Grandma Ruth's Vermont kitchen in December 1966 and watch her making molasses crinkles. She'd cream shortening with brown sugar, add an egg and molasses, then mix in flour, baking soda, cinnamon, ginger, and cloves. The dough was dark brown, soft, and sticky. She'd chill it. Then roll it into walnut-sized balls and roll each ball in granulated sugar before baking. As the cookies baked, they puffed up, then cracked on top, creating a crinkled surface with the sugar forming a sparkly crust. They cost 40 cents to make 4 dozen. They tasted deeply spiced and rich, like gingerbread in cookie form, with a chewy center and slightly crispy edges. The sugar crust added sweetness and crunch. Stand beside Grandma Pearl's Florida kitchen on December 19, 1975, and watch her making coconut macaroons. These weren't the chocolate-dipped macaroons you see today. These were simple, chewy mounds made with sweetened condensed milk, shredded coconut, vanilla, and sometimes a little flour. She'd mix everything together until it formed a sticky mass, then drop spoonfuls onto a greased baking sheet. They baked until the tops and edges turned golden brown. The cookies cost 60 cents to make 3 dozen. They tasted intensely coconutty and sweet, chewy in the center with toasted, crispy edges. The sweetened, condensed milk made them rich and caramelized. Coconut macaroons didn't disappear entirely, but the simple version, no chocolate, no fancy dipping, vanished in the 1980s when bakeries started selling chocolate-dipped versions for $2 each. 10 cookies gone, 40 left. Every single one required hand-shaping, chilling, rolling, pressing, or filling. Your grandmother spent entire weekends making these. You spend 10 minutes at the grocery store buying Pillsbury tubes. That's not convenient. That's cultural erasure. Let's keep going. Walk into Grandma Iris's Oregon kitchen in December 1973 and watch her making lemon snowdrops. She'd cream butter with powdered sugar, add lemon zest and lemon juice, then mix in flour and cornstarch. The dough was soft and pale yellow, fragrant with fresh lemon. She'd shape it into small balls, flatten them slightly, and bake until the bottoms were just golden, but the tops stayed pale. After cooling, she'd dip the tops in a lemon glaze made from powdered sugar and lemon juice, then immediately dip them in shredded coconut. The coconut stuck to the glaze and made them look like little snowballs. The cookies cost 75 cents to make 4 dozen. They tasted bright and lemony, tender and buttery. Stand in Grandma Louise's Massachusetts kitchen on December 14, 1968, and watch her making anise drops. These were old-fashioned cookies flavored with anise extract or anise seeds, made by beating eggs and sugar for 15 minutes until thick and pale, then folding in flour and anise. She'd drop spoonfuls onto greased baking sheets and let them sit overnight at room temperature to develop a hard crust before baking. The next morning, they baked until puffed and pale. The cookies cost 30 cents to make 6 dozen. They tasted like black licorice, intensely anise-flavored, sweet, with a crispy outer shell and a soft, chewy interior. Walk into Grandma Hazel's Texas kitchen in December 1970 and watch her making fruitcake cookies. These were drop cookies loaded with candied fruit, raisins, nuts, and spices, basically fruitcake in cookie form. She'd cream butter with brown sugar, add eggs and vanilla, then mix in flour, baking soda, cinnamon, and nutmeg. The dough was thick and sticky, studded with chopped candied cherries, candied pineapple, dates, raisins, and pecans. She'd drop spoonfuls onto baking sheets and bake until golden. The cookies cost $1.50 to make 5 dozen because candied fruit was expensive. They tasted rich, fruity, and spiced, chewy from the fruit and crunchy from the nuts. Fruitcake cookies disappeared in the early 1980s when people decided fruitcake was a joke and candied fruit was disgusting. Stand beside Grandma Greta's kitchen in Wisconsin in December 1972 and watch her making almond crescents. She'd grind blanched almonds in a meat grinder until they were almost powder, then mix them with butter, sugar, flour, and vanilla. The dough was rich and crumbly, barely holding together. She'd shape pieces into small logs, then curve them into crescent moon shapes. They baked until pale golden, not browned. While still warm, she'd roll them in vanilla-scented powdered sugar, made by storing vanilla beans in a jar of powdered sugar for weeks. After cooling, she'd roll them again. The cookies cost $1 to make 4 dozen because almonds were expensive. Walk into Grandma Ilse's Pennsylvania kitchen in December 1967 and watch her making Lebkuchen. These German spice bars were made with honey, molasses, spices, citrus zest, and candied fruit. pressed into a sheet pan, baked, then glazed and cut into rectangles. She'd heat honey and molasses together, cool it slightly, then mix in eggs, flour, baking powder, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, allspice, lemon zest, orange zest, and chopped candied citron. The dough was thick and aromatic. Christmas cookies erased. 35 left. These weren't slice and bake. These required grinding nuts, rolling dough thin, pressing dough overnight, glazing while warm. Your grandmother knew techniques you've never heard of. She learned them from her mother. You learned nothing. Let's keep going. Stand in Grandma Evelyn's New Jersey kitchen on December 16, 1974, and watch her making ribbon cookies. She'd make a large batch of butter cookie dough, divide it into 3 parts, and color 1 part pink with food coloring, 1 part green, and leave 1 part plain. She'd press each color into a rectangle in a loaf pan, stacking them to create 3 layers: pink, white, green. The loaf chilled overnight. Then she'd slice it into thin slices, revealing the colorful stripes. They baked until just set, not browned. The cookies cost 60 cents to make 6 dozen. They tasted buttery and vanilla-scented with a tender, shortbread-like texture. The colors made them festive and pretty. Ribbon cookies disappeared in the mid-1980s when people decided they took too much time and effort. The tradition of layering colored dough died when shortcuts became more important than presentation. Walk into Grandma Nancy's Minnesota kitchen in December 1969 and watch her making peppermint candy cane cookies. She'd make 2 batches of sugar cookie dough, 1 plain, 1 colored red with food coloring. She'd roll pieces of each color into thin ropes, twist them together like a barber pole, then shape them into candy canes. They baked until set, but still pale. After cooling, she'd brush them with egg white and sprinkle them with crushed peppermint candy. The cookies cost 50 cents to make 3 dozen. They tasted like peppermint and butter, with a crisp, snappy texture. The crushed candy added sparkle and extra peppermint flavor. Peppermint candy canes disappeared by 1983 when people decided rolling and twisting dough was too tedious. The tradition of hand-shaping each cookie died when pre-shaped cookie cutters became the norm. Grandmothers stopped making them when their hands developed arthritis. Stand beside Grandma Sigrid's Iowa Scandinavian kitchen in December 1971 and watch her making fattigmann, Norwegian fried bow-tie cookies. She'd beat egg yolks with sugar until thick, add cream and cardamom, then fold in flour. The dough was soft and buttery. She'd roll it paper thin, cut it into diamond shapes, cut a slit in the center of each diamond, then pull 1 corner through the slit to create a bow tie shape. The bow ties got fried in hot lard until golden and puffed, then drained and dusted with powdered sugar. They cost 40 cents to make 100. They tasted buttery, delicate, and cardamom-scented, shattering when you bit into them. Fattigmann disappeared by 1982 when people stopped frying cookies at home and Scandinavian traditions died with elderly immigrants. The recipe required skill and patience nobody had anymore. Walk into Grandma Violet's English-American kitchen in California in December 1973 and watch her making brandy snaps. She'd heat butter, sugar, corn syrup, and brandy until melted, then stir in flour and ginger. She'd drop tiny spoonfuls onto baking sheets, far apart because they spread, and bake until bubbly and golden. The moment they came out of the oven, she'd work fast, lifting each cookie with a spatula and rolling it around a wooden spoon handle while still hot and pliable. They hardened into crispy tubes. Some she filled with whipped cream. The cookies cost 75 cents to make 2 dozen because they required speed and skill. They tasted buttery, caramelized, and ginger-spiced, shattering into shards when you bit them. Brandy snaps disappeared in the 1980s when people decided they were too hard to make. The skill of rolling hot cookies died with English grandmothers. Stand in Grandma May's Kentucky kitchen on December 17, 1970, and watch her making brown sugar refrigerator cookies. She'd cream butter with dark brown sugar, add an egg and vanilla, then mix in flour, baking soda, and chopped pecan. The dough was soft and sticky. She'd shape it into logs, wrap them in waxed paper, and refrigerate them for days. Whenever she wanted cookies, she'd slice the log into thin rounds and bake them until crispy. The cookies cost 50 cents to make 8 dozen. They tasted like butterscotch, rich, caramelized, nutty, with crispy edges and chewy centers. Brown sugar refrigerator cookies didn't disappear entirely. Every single one required techniques you don't know: twisting dough, rolling hot cookies, layering colors, frying in lard. Your grandmother's hands knew exactly what to do. Yours don't. That's what happens when 3 generations stop baking. Keep going. Walk into Grandma Clara's Ohio kitchen in December 1968 and watch her making lemon icebox cookies. She'd cream butter with sugar, add fresh lemon juice, and grated lemon zest, then mix in flour. The dough was pale yellow and fragrant. She'd shape it into logs, roll them in colored sugar, yellow or white, wrap them in waxed paper, and refrigerate overnight. The next day, she'd slice the logs into thin rounds and bake until the edges were just golden. The cookies cost 40 cents to make 6 dozen. Stand beside Grandma Dorothy's Minnesota kitchen on December 18, 1975, and watch her making chocolate-dipped pretzel cookies. These weren't store-bought pretzels dipped in chocolate. These were homemade butter cookies shaped into pretzels, baked, then dipped in melted chocolate. She'd make a simple butter cookie dough, roll it into ropes, twist them into pretzel shapes, bake until golden, then dip half of each pretzel in melted semi-sweet chocolate. The chocolate hardened as it cooled. The cookies cost 75 cents to make 4 dozen. They tasted buttery and vanilla-scented with rich, slightly bitter chocolate. The pretzel shape made them fun and festive. Homemade chocolate-dipped pretzels disappeared by 1984 when people started buying store-bought pretzels and dipping those instead, which was faster but not the same. Walk into Grandma Louise's Georgia kitchen in December 1972 and watch her making pecan tassies. She'd make cream cheese pastry by beating cream cheese with butter, then mixing in flour. She'd press tiny balls of dough into miniature muffin tins, creating little pastry cups. The filling was like pecan pie filling: brown sugar, eggs, butter, vanilla, and chopped pecans. She'd fill each pastry cup with the mixture and bake until the filling puffed and the pastry turned golden. Stand in Grandma Betty's North Carolina kitchen on December 14, 1969, and watch her making vanilla wafers from scratch. She'd cream butter with sugar, add an egg and vanilla, then mix in flour and baking powder. The dough was soft and sticky. She'd drop tiny spoonfuls onto baking sheets and bake them until the edges turned golden brown. The cookies puffed up, then flattened slightly as they cooled. They cost 30 cents to make 100. They tasted like pure vanilla, buttery, sweet, crisp, with a delicate crunch. Homemade vanilla wafers disappeared by 1980 when Nabisco Nilla wafers became so cheap and convenient. Walk into Grandma Ino's Michigan Finnish kitchen in December 1973 and watch her making cardamom cookies. She'd cream butter with sugar, add eggs and crushed cardamom seeds, lots of them, then mix in flour. The dough smelled intensely aromatic, floral and slightly spicy. She'd shape it into balls, flatten them slightly with a fork, and brush the tops with beaten egg white before sprinkling them with pearl sugar. They baked until golden. The cookies cost 60 cents to make 5 dozen. They tasted buttery and uniquely spiced. Cardamom has a flavor unlike anything else, floral and citrusy, and warming all at once. The pearl sugar added sparkle and crunch. Cardamom cookies disappeared by 1982 when Finnish bakeries closed. 25 cookies gone. Halfway there. These recipes required ingredients you've never heard of: cardamom seeds, pearl sugar, candied citron, lard for frying. Your grandmother's pantry was full of things that don't exist in yours. That's not progress, that's loss. Let's finish this. Stand beside Grandma Sylvia's New York kitchen on December 19th, 1971, and watch her making jam thumbprints with almond paste centers. She'd make a butter cookie dough enriched with almond paste, ground almonds mixed with sugar, and egg whites. The dough was rich and slightly grainy. She'd shape it into balls, press her thumb into the center, and fill each well with thick jam, apricot, raspberry, or prune. They baked until golden. The cookies cost $1 to make 3 dozen because almond paste was expensive. They tasted intensely almond-flavored, buttery, with the jam adding fruity sweetness and tartness. The almond paste made them richer and more complex than plain thumbprints. Jam thumbprints with almond paste disappeared by 1984 when people stopped buying almond paste and started making plain thumbprints instead. The tradition of enriching cookie dough with almond paste died when shortcuts replaced quality. Walk into Grandma Ruby's Mississippi kitchen in December 1974 and watch her making chocolate crinkles. She'd mix melted, unsweetened chocolate with vegetable oil, sugar, eggs, flour, baking powder, and vanilla. The dough was soft, sticky, and intensely chocolate. She'd chill it overnight, then roll it into balls and roll each ball in powdered sugar before baking. As the cookies baked, they puffed and cracked, creating a crinkled surface with dark chocolate showing through the white powdered sugar. The cookies cost 60 cents to make 4 dozen. They tasted rich and fudgy, intensely chocolate, with a slightly crispy exterior and a soft brownie-like center. The powdered sugar added sweetness and created a beautiful contrast. Chocolate crinkles didn't disappear entirely, but most people stopped making them at home in the 1980s when brownie mix became easier. The tradition of rolling dough in powdered sugar died when convenience mattered more than presentation. Stand in Grandma Jean's Pennsylvania kitchen on December 20th, 1975, and watch her making peanut butter blossoms. She'd cream peanut butter with butter and sugar, add eggs and vanilla, then mix in flour and baking soda. The dough was soft and peanutty. She'd roll it into balls, roll them in granulated sugar, and bake until puffed and cracked. The moment they came out of the oven, she'd press a Hershey's Kiss into the center of each cookie while they were still hot. The chocolate melted slightly, sealing itself to the cookie. The cookies cost 75 cents to make 3 dozen because Hershey's Kisses were expensive. They tasted peanut buttery and sweet, with rich chocolate in every bite. Peanut butter blossoms didn't disappear, but the tradition of making them at home died in the 1980s when bakeries started selling them. Most people now buy them instead of making them. Walk into Grandma Martha's Vermont kitchen in December 1970 and watch her making butter wreaths with a cookie press. She'd make a rich butter cookie dough with flour, butter, sugar, egg yolks, and almond extract. The dough had to be soft enough to press, but firm enough to hold its shape. She'd load it into a cookie press, fitted with a star tip, then pipe circles onto baking sheets to create wreaths. Before baking, she'd decorate each wreath with tiny bits of red and green candied cherries to look like holly berries and leaves. They baked until pale golden. The cookies cost 50 cents to make 6 dozen. They tasted buttery and almond-scented, delicate and crisp. Butter wreaths disappeared in the 1980s when cookie presses got shoved into closets and nobody wanted to spend time piping dough. The tradition died when pre-shaped cutters replaced skill. Stand beside Grandma May's San Francisco Chinatown kitchen in December 1972 and watch her making Chinese almond cookies. She'd cream lard, traditional, or shortening with sugar, add an egg and almond extract, then mix in flour and baking powder. The dough was crumbly and sandy. She'd shape it into balls, flatten them slightly, press a blanched almond into the center of each cookie, and brush the tops with beaten egg yolk for shine. They baked until golden. The cookies cost 40 cents to make 6 dozen. They tasted intensely almond-flavored, crumbly, and shortbread-like, with a rich, almost savory quality from the lard. Chinese almond cookies disappeared from home kitchens by 1983 when Chinese bakeries started mass-producing them and people stopped making them at home. The tradition of using lard died when Americans decided it was unhealthy. 30 cookies gone, 20 left. Every single one required skills your grandmother learned over decades: pressing dough, piping wreaths, timing hot cookies, brushing with egg wash. You know how to peel plastic off pre-made dough. That's the difference between her generation and yours. Let's finish. Walk into Grandma Eleanor's main kitchen on December 21st, 1968, and watch her making gingerbread men from scratch. She'd mix flour with baking soda, cinnamon, ginger, cloves, and salt, then cream butter with brown sugar and molasses until smooth. After adding an egg, she'd gradually mix in the dry ingredients until a stiff, dark dough formed. The dough chilled overnight in the refrigerator, making it firm enough to roll out paper thin without sticking. The next morning, she'd roll the dough on a floured surface and cut out gingerbread men with a tin cutter her mother had given her in 1935. The cookies baked until firm and slightly puffed, filling the house with the smell of molasses and spices. After cooling, she'd make royal icing from powdered sugar and egg whites, beating it until stiff and glossy. She'd pipe white icing onto each gingerbread man, buttons, eyes, mouth, icing along the arms and legs, turning plain brown cookies into little people. Stand beside Grandma Rosa's New Jersey Italian kitchen on December 16, 1973. And watch her making pizzelles with an electric pizza iron. She'd beat eggs with sugar until thick and pale, add melted butter and anise extract, then fold in flour and baking powder. The batter was thin, like waffle batter. She'd heat the pizza iron until a drop of water sizzled on it, then spoon a tablespoon of batter onto the center of each patterned grid. She'd close the iron and press firmly, letting the batter spread and cook into thin, crispy waffle cookies imprinted with intricate snowflake patterns. After 30 seconds, she'd open the iron and lift out the golden pizzelle, working quickly before it cooled and hardened. Some she left flat. Others she rolled around a wooden dowel while still hot, creating tubes that could be filled with whipped cream or cannoli filling. The cookies cooled and hardened into crispy, delicate wafers. Walk into Grandma Helen's Oregon kitchen in December 1970 and watch her making meringue kisses. She'd separate egg whites from yolks carefully. Even a speck of yolk would ruin the meringue. She'd beat the egg whites with cream of tartar until they formed soft peaks, then gradually add sugar, beating constantly until the meringue was stiff, glossy, and stood in firm peaks. She'd fold in vanilla extract and sometimes a drop of food coloring, pink or green for Christmas. Using a spoon or a pastry bag, she'd pipe or drop mounds of meringue onto parchment-lined baking sheets. The meringues baked at a very low temperature, 200 degrees, for 2 hours, drying out rather than actually baking. They came out crispy, white, or pastel, and light as air. Some versions had chocolate chips folded in, or she'd swirl different colors together. Stand in Grandma Opal's Texas kitchen on December 18th, 1974, and watch her making pecan sandies. She'd toast pecans in the oven until fragrant and golden, then chop them finely, almost to a powder. She'd cream butter with powdered sugar, add vanilla, then mix in flour and the ground pecans. The dough was rich, crumbly, and sandy textured from the ground nuts. She'd shape it into small balls or crescents, place them on baking sheets, and bake until the bottoms were just golden, but the tops stayed pale. She'd cream butter with powdered sugar, add vanilla, then mix in flour and the ground pecans. The dough was rich, crumbly, and sandy textured from the ground nuts. She'd shape it into small balls or crescents, place them on baking sheets, and bake until the bottoms were just golden, but the tops stayed pale. After cooling slightly, she'd roll them in powdered sugar while still warm, then roll them again after they cooled completely. The cookies cost $1 to make 4 dozen because pecans were expensive. They tasted buttery, nutty, and melt-in-your-mouth tender, with a sandy, crumbly texture that dissolved on your tongue. The powdered sugar added sweetness and a soft, snowy coating. Pecan sandies didn't disappear entirely, but the tradition of making them at home died in the 1980s when Keebler started selling them in bags for $2. People stopped grinding pecans and making them from scratch because store-bought was good enough. The tradition of rolling them in powdered sugar twice, once warm, once cool, died when shortcuts replaced technique. Grandma Opal stopped making them in 1983 when her grandchildren said they tasted the same as store-bought, but they didn't. Let's walk into Grandma Ingrid's Minnesota kitchen in December 1971 and watch her making rosettes, delicate, lacy Scandinavian fried cookies shaped like flowers. She'd make a thin batter by beating eggs with sugar, then mixing in milk, flour, salt, and vanilla. The batter was as thin as crepe batter. She'd heat a pot of lard or vegetable oil to 375 degrees, then heat a special rosette iron in the oil, a long-handled metal rod with an ornate flower-shaped mold on the end. She'd dip the hot iron into the batter, but not all the way, just deep enough to coat the mold without covering the top. Then she'd plunge the batter-coated mold into the hot oil. The batter puffed and crisped immediately, forming a delicate, lacy cookie. After 30 seconds, she'd lift the iron out of the oil and use a fork to gently pry the rosette off the mold. She'd drain them on paper towels and dust them with powdered sugar. The rosettes cost 50 cents to make 100. They tasted buttery and delicate, shattering into crispy shards when you bit them. They were so thin and lacy you could almost see through them. Rosettes disappeared by 1982 when people stopped frying cookies at home and rosette irons got packed away in attic boxes. The Scandinavian tradition died with elderly immigrants who remembered making them every Christmas. 35 cookies erased, 15 left. These required tools you don't own: pizzle irons, rosette molds, cookie presses, pastry bags. Your grandmother had a drawer full of specialty equipment. You have a smartphone. That's what happens when baking becomes something you order, not something you do. Stand beside Grandma Clara's Ohio kitchen on December 17, 1969, and watch her making brown edge wafers. She'd cream butter with sugar until fluffy, add an egg and vanilla, then mix in flour and a pinch of salt. The dough was soft and sticky. She'd drop tiny half-teaspoons of dough onto greased baking sheets, spacing them far apart because they spread dramatically during baking. The cookies baked at high heat, 375 degrees, until the edges turned dark brown and the centers stayed pale golden. The key was timing. 30 seconds too long, and they burned. 30 seconds too short, and they stayed soft. She'd let them cool on the baking sheet for 1 minute, then carefully transfer them to wire racks with a thin spatula. They hardened as they cooled into thin, crispy wafers. The cookies cost 25 cents to make 8 dozen. They tasted buttery and vanilla-scented, with an intensely crispy texture that shattered when you bit into them. The dark brown edges had a slightly caramelized, toasty flavor. Brown edge wafers disappeared by 1983 when people stopped wanting plain cookies and started demanding chocolate chips, candy pieces, and frosting. The skill of timing thin cookies perfectly died when bakers gave up on anything that required precision. Grandma Clara stopped making them in 1980 when her family said they looked burnt and refused to eat them. But they weren't burnt. They were perfect. Walk into Grandma Liesel's Missouri German kitchen in December 1972 and watch her making cinnamon stars, traditional German Christmas cookies made without flour. She'd beat egg whites until stiff, then gradually fold in powdered sugar, ground almonds, and lots of cinnamon. The dough was more like thick meringue, sticky and fragrant. She'd dust her work surface heavily with powdered sugar and roll the mixture out carefully, then cut stars with a cookie cutter. Before baking, she'd brush each star with a glaze made from leftover egg white and powdered sugar. The cookies baked at low temperature until the glaze hardened into a shiny white coating, but the cookies stayed soft inside. They were never crispy. They were meant to be chewy. The cookies cost $1.50 to make 4 dozen because ground almonds were expensive. German bakeries closed, and the tradition died with elderly immigrants. Grandma Liesel stopped making them in 1981 when her grandchildren said they didn't taste like real cookies. Stand in Grandma Esther's West Virginia kitchen on December 19, 1973, and watch her making old-fashioned ginger snaps. Not the soft, chewy kind, but the thin, crispy kind that snapped in half when you broke them. She'd cream shortening with sugar, add molasses and an egg, then mix in flour, baking soda, ginger, cinnamon, and cloves. The dough was stiff and dark brown. She'd roll it into marble-sized balls, roll them in granulated sugar, and bake them at high heat until they puffed, cracked, then flattened as they cooled. The key was baking them long enough to get crispy. Undercooked ginger snaps stayed soft and chewy, which wasn't the point. She'd let them cool completely on the baking sheets, where they hardened into thin, crispy wafers. The cookies cost 35 cents to make 6 dozen. Walk into Grandma Violet's Washington State kitchen in December 1970 and watch her making filbert balls. Filberts, what we now call hazelnuts, grew wild in the Pacific Northwest, and she'd gather them in the fall, roast them, rub off the skins, and grind them finely. She'd cream butter with powdered sugar, add vanilla, then mix in flour and the ground filberts. The dough was rich and crumbly, barely holding together. She'd shape it into small balls and bake them until pale golden. While still warm, she'd roll them in powdered sugar, then roll them again after cooling. The cookies cost 50 cents to make 5 dozen because filberts were free if you gathered them yourself. They tasted intensely nutty and buttery with a sandy, melt-in-your-mouth texture. The filberts had a richer, more complex flavor than walnuts or pecans, slightly sweet, slightly bitter, deeply earthy. Stand beside Grandma Dorothy's Minnesota kitchen on December 20th, 1974, and watch her making chocolate spritz cookies. She'd cream butter with sugar, add an egg and vanilla, then mix in flour, cocoa powder, and a pinch of salt. The dough was dark brown and had to be the perfect consistency, soft enough to press through a cookie press, but firm enough to hold intricate shapes. She'd load the dough into a cookie press fitted with decorative discs, Christmas trees, wreaths, stars, and press the dough directly onto ungreased baking sheets. The cookies baked quickly at high heat, staying soft and tender. Before baking, she'd sometimes decorate them with colored sugar, silver dragées, or red cinnamon candies. Grandma Dorothy stopped making them in 1983 when her arthritis made pressing the cookie press too painful. The recipe died with her, and her grandchildren never learned how to use the press. 40 cookies gone, 10 left. These required skills nobody teaches anymore: pressing dough, rolling meringue, frying rosettes, grinding nuts by hand. Your grandmother learned these from her mother over decades. You learned nothing. That's what happens when tradition dies. Here are the last 10. Walk into Grandma Eleni's Chicago Greek kitchen in December 1968 and watch her making curambiades. She'd cream butter, lots of it, with powdered sugar, add ouzo, Greek anise liqueur, then mix in toasted and ground almonds and flour. The dough was rich, crumbly, and fragrant with ouzo. She'd shape it into crescents or balls, sometimes pressing a whole clove into the top of each cookie before baking. They baked until pale golden, not browned. While the cookies were still hot, she'd dip them in rose water, then roll them in powdered sugar until completely coated. After cooling, she'd roll them again, creating a thick white layer. Some versions had the whole clove left in as a traditional garnish, though you were supposed to remove it before eating. The cookies cost $1 to make 4 dozen because butter and almonds were expensive. They tasted intensely buttery with a subtle anise and rosewater flavor, melt in your mouth tender, crumbling when you bit them. Curambiades didn't disappear entirely from Greek communities, but the tradition of making them at home died in the 1980s when Greek bakeries started mass-producing them, and younger Greek Americans stopped learning the recipe. The tradition of dipping them in rose water died when rose water became impossible to find in regular grocery stores. Stand beside Grandma Sylvia's New York kitchen on December 21st, 1975, and watch her making almond paste horns. She'd make a dough by creaming butter with almond paste, sugar, eggs, and flour until smooth. The dough was pale yellow and intensely almond-flavored. She'd chill it, then roll it out and cut it into triangles. She'd place a small log of almond paste filling, made from pure almond paste, sugar, and egg whites, at the wide end of each triangle, then roll it up into a crescent horn shape, the horns baked until golden. While still warm, she'd brush them with apricot jam that had been heated and strained, then roll them in sliced almonds. The jam acted as glue, making the almonds stick to the surface. The cookies cost $2 to make 3 dozen because almond paste was expensive. They tasted intensely almond-flavored, rich, sweet, buttery, with the sliced almonds adding crunch. Almond paste horns disappeared by 1985 when people stopped buying almond paste and started thinking cookies shouldn't require so many steps. The tradition died when bakeries started charging $3 each for what used to cost pennies to make at home. Grandma Sylvia stopped making them in 1982 when her arthritis made rolling dough impossible. Walk into Grandma May's Kentucky kitchen in December 1970 and watch her making date-filled cookies. She'd cook chopped dates with sugar and water until they formed a thick, jammy paste, then cool it completely. Meanwhile, she'd make a simple sugar cookie dough. She'd roll the dough thin, cut it into circles with a biscuit cutter, place a spoonful of date filling on one half of each circle, fold it over to create a half-moon shape, and seal the edges with a fork. The cookies baked until golden. Some versions had the date filling showing through a cutout on top, made with a thimble or small cutter before folding. After baking, she'd dust them with powdered sugar. The cookies cost $1 to make 5 dozen. They tasted sweet and fruity, with the dates providing a caramel-like, concentrated sweetness. The pastry was buttery and tender. Date-filled cookies disappeared by 1984 when people stopped buying dates and started thinking dried fruit belonged in fruitcake, not cookies. The tradition of cooking date filling from scratch died when shortcuts replaced homemade. Grandma May stopped making them in 1981 when her family said they preferred chocolate chip cookies. The recipe died, and most Americans under 50 have never tasted date-filled cookies. Stand in Grandma Anna's kitchen in rural Vermont in December 1973 and watch her making lemon cornmeal cookies. She'd cream butter with sugar, add eggs, fresh lemon juice, and grated lemon zest. Then mix in flour and fine yellow cornmeal. The dough was grainy from the cornmeal, pale yellow, and fragrant with lemon. She'd shape it into balls, flatten them slightly with the bottom of a glass dipped in sugar, and bake until the edges turned golden. After cooling, she'd sometimes drizzle them with a simple lemon glaze made from powdered sugar and lemon juice. The cookies cost 40 cents to make 6 dozen. They tasted bright and lemony, buttery and slightly gritty from the cornmeal, with a tender crumb that was different from regular cookies. The cornmeal added texture and a subtle corn flavor that balanced the tart lemon. Lemon cornmeal cookies disappeared by 1983 when people stopped baking with cornmeal and started thinking it belonged only in cornbread. The tradition died with rural New England grandmothers who grew up eating cornmeal at every meal. Grandma Anna stopped making them in 1980 when her family said they were too grainy and weird. Walk into Grandma Sophia's Greek-American kitchen in Boston in December 1976 and watch her making walnut crescents with honey glaze. She'd toast walnuts until fragrant, then grind them finely in a meat grinder. She'd make a dough by creaming butter with sugar, adding egg yolks and brandy, then mixing in flour and the ground walnuts. The dough was rich and crumbly. She'd shape pieces into small logs, curve them into crescents, and bake until pale golden. While the cookies were still hot, she'd brush them with a honey syrup she'd made by heating honey with a little water and cinnamon. The hot cookies absorbed the syrup, turning shiny and sticky. After they cooled, she'd dust them with powdered sugar. The cookies cost $1.50 to make 4 dozen because walnuts were expensive. They tasted rich and nutty, sweet from the honey glaze, with a buttery, tender crumb. The honey added a floral sweetness that soaked into the cookies. Walnut crescents with honey glaze disappeared by 1985 when Greek bakeries started mass-producing them and people stopped making them at home. 45 cookies erased, 5 left. These weren't slice and bake. These weren't icebox cookies. These required grinding nuts, cooking date filling, brushing with honey, rolling in rose water. Your grandmother knew chemistry, timing, and patience. You know how to preheat an oven. Here are the last 5. Stand beside Grandma Edith's Missouri kitchen on December 22, 1969, and watch her making mincemeat cookies. She'd open a jar of prepared mincemeat, a thick, dark mixture of dried fruits, spices, suet, and sometimes a splash of brandy, and mix it into a simple drop cookie dough made with butter, sugar, eggs, flour, and spices. The dough was thick and chunky, studded with bits of raisins, apples, and citrus peel from the mincemeat. She'd drop spoonfuls onto baking sheets and bake until golden. The cookies cost $1 to make 5 dozen because mincemeat was expensive. They tasted rich, fruity, spiced, and slightly boozy, with a chewy texture from the dried fruit. They were like fruit cake in cookie form. Mincemeat cookies disappeared by 1982 when people decided mincemeat was disgusting and started making jokes about it. Jars of mincemeat disappeared from grocery store shelves, and younger generations had never tasted it. The tradition died with elderly grandmothers who remembered when mincemeat pie was a Christmas staple. Walk into Grandma Heidi's Swiss-American kitchen in Ohio in December 1971 and watch her making leckerli, Swiss honey spice cookies. She'd heat honey with sugar until melted, cool it slightly, then mix in eggs, flour, baking powder, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, candied orange peel, and chopped almonds. The dough was thick, sticky, and intensely aromatic. She'd press it into a greased sheet pan, spreading it evenly. It baked until firm, Then, while still hot, she'd brush the top with a thin sugar glaze made from powdered sugar and lemon juice. After cooling, she'd cut it into small rectangles. The cookies cost $1.50 to make 100 bars because honey and candied peel were expensive. They tasted like gingerbread, but more complex. Honey sweetened instead of molasses, with citrus and almond adding brightness. They were chewy and dense, not crispy. Leckerli disappeared by 1984 when Swiss bakeries closed and younger generations decided spice cookies should only be gingerbread. The tradition of pressing dough into pans and glazing while hot died when shortcuts replaced old-world techniques. Stand in Grandma Pearl's Florida kitchen on December 18, 1974, and watch her making orange slice cookies. She'd chop orange slice candies, those sugar-coated jelly-like candies shaped like orange wedges, into small pieces. She'd make a simple drop cookie dough with butter, sugar, eggs, flour, vanilla, and baking soda. Orange slice cookies disappeared by 1985 when people decided putting candy in cookies was trashy and too sweet. Walk into Grandma Hazel's Indiana kitchen in December 1972 and watch her making black walnut cookies. Black walnuts weren't regular English walnuts. They were wild nuts with a stronger, more pungent flavor, almost earthy and slightly bitter. She'd crack black walnut shells with a hammer. They were harder than regular walnuts. Pick out the meats and chop them finely. She'd make a simple butter cookie dough, fold in the black walnuts, shape it into balls, flatten them with a fork, and bake until golden. The cookies cost 50 cents to make 5 dozen because black walnuts were free if you gathered them yourself. They tasted intensely nutty, stronger and more complex than regular walnuts, with a slightly tannic, almost astringent finish. People either loved them or hated them. Black walnut cookies disappeared by 1983 when people stopped gathering wild black walnuts and grocery stores stopped selling them. The tradition died with rural Midwesterners who grew up cracking black walnuts every fall. Grandma Hazel stopped making them in 1980 when her family said they tasted weird and too strong. Stand beside Grandma Clara's Ohio kitchen on December 23, 1975, and watch her making butter balls with jelly centers. She'd cream butter with powdered sugar, add vanilla, then mix in flour and finely chopped pecans. The dough was rich and crumbly. She'd shape it into small balls, place them on baking sheets, and use her thumb or the handle of a wooden spoon to create a deep well in the center of each cookie. They baked until pale golden. While still warm, she'd fill each well with a small spoonful of jelly, grape, strawberry, or raspberry. The cookies cost 75 cents to make 4 dozen. They tasted buttery and nutty, with the sweet jelly providing a burst of fruit flavor in the center. The contrast between the tender, crumbly cookie and the smooth jelly was perfect. Butter balls with jelly centers didn't disappear entirely, but the tradition of making them at home died in the 1980s when people started buying them from bakeries instead. The tradition of pressing a well into each cookie by hand died when shortcuts replaced handwork. Bake. These weren't break-apart dough from a tube. These were cookies that required cookie presses, pizzelle irons, rosette molds, meat grinders, and steady hands. Cookies that took entire weekends to make. Cookies that filled tins stacked in the pantry, each layer separated by waxed paper. Cookies that meant Christmas was coming. Your grandmother knew how to cream butter by hand. She knew how to beat egg whites to stiff peaks without an electric mixer. She knew how to roll dough paper thin, press it through a cookie press, shape it into crescents, dip it in egg white and pearl sugar, fry it in hot oil, brush it with honey while still warm. She knew chemistry, timing, and patience. You don't. And that's not entirely your fault. Corporations spent billions convincing you that baking was too hard, too time-consuming, too complicated. They sold you tubes of dough for $4 that cost your grandmother 25 cents to make from scratch. They told you convenience was progress. They lied. What really happened was this: your grandmother's knowledge was stolen. Her recipes were dismissed as too much work. Her traditions were erased in favor of products that made corporations rich. And now you don't know how to use a cookie press. You don't know what a rosette iron is. You've never tasted black walnuts or candied citron. You lost all of it. But here's the truth: these recipes still exist. Some are written in old church cookbooks, yellowed recipe cards, or notebooks in your grandmother's handwriting. Call your grandmother if she's still alive. Ask her about the cookies she made when she was young. Write down the recipe. Make them once, just once. Because once your grandmother's generation is gone, these cookies are gone forever. And all you'll have left is a tube of Pillsbury dough and a microwave. Your grandmother's hands are gone, but her recipes don't have to be.